So thank you, Gil, for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
Thank you. You are a big part of my anatomy course. Your presence is peppered throughout, kind of whether literally or metaphorically. But then we also view a lot of your videos that you have up on gilhedley.com. Some
Oh,
of
good. I'm
your
glad.
video clips that are so informative. So a quick intro. This is my guy Gil Hedley. I refer to you as my anatomy mentor. Uh,
Aw.
Gil and I first met in 2013. I landed in his cadaver lab, his dissection lab, in San Francisco. And one of the things that Gil does, and he's so good at kind of like facilitating, like kind of fostering all of us first-time dissectors, first-time lab enthusiasts, and coddling us and easing us into the situation. We at the beginning of every day we have an hour of circle time just to sort of check in emotionally and psychologically, see how things are going, because this is the process is, I'm not sure if it's this emotional and if people in med school in their gross anatomy courses have this type of connection that you kind of facilitate in your dissection courses, but it is very emotional, and so Gil kind of guides us through that very nicely. Anyhow, on the first day of my first lab with Gil, we were going around the circle and introducing people and saying a little bit about ourselves. And I was just so surprised at the number of people who would say, "Oh, this is my second time, or my fifth time, or my sixth time." I was 100% convinced that this was going to be one and done. This was it. And then, of course, a year later, I was chatting with you on the phone, and you were talking about the next project and the 3-week course, and I was like, "Well, I can't miss the 3-week course, so I've got to do that one." And then I was just hooked for life, essentially. And I start my anatomy course talking about how anatomy changes, and I try to get across to people that well, first of all, obviously anatomy does change evolutionarily over the course of millions of years, but I'm referring more to our understanding of it, and I try to explain to people, try to convince people how that's even possible. Because when you say, there's a new knee ligament discovered, and there's a new quadricep muscle discovered, the tensor of the vastus lateralis, people are like, "But I don't understand. How is that? How were all those things missed for so many years?" But that I had that moment between the first lab that I attended with Gil and then the second. It was like, oh, there's so much more. And you've been doing this for, is it 25 years now? Is it longer? Almost 30?
Yeah, I just completed my 26th dissection season, so 25 years, 26 seasons,
Nice.
basically.
Nice. And you keep going back, obviously.
Every day, literally, for 7 months now.
Yeah. So a little side note of a result of the pandemic is that I was supposed to spend some time with Gil in Colorado back in March, and I didn't go, but we ended up doing a couple of big online projects, remote projects. But Gil, who used to reside in Florida, was sort of stuck in Colorado, and so is now just going to relocate there because he has a good lab there and some good cadavers there, and so he has been for, what is it? Is it 7 months?
7 months, yeah.
Working on the same 2 cadavers in a way that he has never been able to in the past. I'm assuming, right? I mean, I know what it was like to go from that 6-day course to the 3-week course, and now you are in this massive 7-month course.
Yeah, with maybe a month and a half to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's been wonderful because I haven't been able to drill down on the details in the past like I can now, and to see every day as a constant opportunity for revelations in a universe that has not been completely explored or appreciated, no doubt. So, it's not the book isn't closed. There are still chapters, that we can write.
Yeah. And this is, I haven't mentioned, this is Gil's what do you? This is your company. This is your offering to the universe. What is it? So Somanauts. When you attend Gil's course, you are referred to as a Somonaut because you are literally discovering. You are a pioneer essentially.
Yeah, so I like to say that like the astronauts who explore outer space, the Somanauts explore inner space.
Yeah.
And really, that's what you are. So, you're navigating, and not like navigator or nautical or sailor, right? So you're sort of sailing the seas of the body.
Yeah, and so I've done this now. I've worked very closely with Gil for a handful of years now, and it's just he's been such an asset to my understanding, and then I'm passing little tidbits of Gil's work on to you guys. So a couple of questions, Gil. Let's start with so you. Several times you've talked about how your dissection skills have sort of evolved over the years, over these 25, 26 years.
Tremendously, yeah.
Right. And excuse me. And you talk about how like initially you were just your skills limited you to basically like pulling off little tiny pieces of skin, little chips. You kind of you sometimes refer to them as. And now you've gotten to the place where you can reflect the skin as an entire entity, as an isolated entity, almost intact, essentially. And so I want to know more about how you first became enthralled with that layer that's directly beneath the skin, the what you refer to as the superficial fascia, or what's more commonly referred to as the subcutaneous fat layer. What kind of drew you in, and what has kind of kept you there for the past 26 years?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can say I had never even heard of the stuff, superficial fascia, until I was at my pre-training with Tom Myers, and he led us through these wonderful sort of psychometric exercises where we would sort of go looking to feel where our client was living in their body, layer by layer, and there was a surprising amount of corroboration, and so that was my introduction to just the imaginary notion that the body was in layers. But when I took up dissection myself, and I had Grant's Atlas, there was no such reference point, and so I dissected higgledy-piggledy and made a big mess. And when I thought to bring other people into the lab the next year, I was like, I can bring them in, but I can't do that. That was terrifying. I learned a lot, but it was not artful, nor did it respect the textures and continuities of the tissue that I was so used to feeling with my hands. And so, I could feel superficial fascia in my hands. I thought something in between the skin and the deep fascia, but what does it look like? I want to see it. And so I proposed to a small group of people who were working with me, let's try and not follow that book over there. Let's do something else that, in the hope that it would be coherent with our own intentions and practices. And so we did kind of, I said, okay, let's just take away the skin. Let's make the skin go away and see what's underneath it. And so we did that with little skill, but the revelation, the end product of that was stunning. There was this beautiful yellow fleece in front of our eyes covering the whole body that there's no picture of in a book. So that's compelling. When you see something like that, it's incredibly compelling. It's like you've stumbled upon some branch of the Grand Canyon that nobody ever sailed up. Like, how could this be? How could it be that so little attention is paid to something that's so important, so that covers so much real estate of the human form, and that often is the main avenue of expression of a person. And so I thought, I want to learn more about that, and over time, proceeded to dissect it with increasing skill. It didn't come out pretty in the first few instances, but that superficial projection of the superficial fascia just beneath the skin was quite amazing that first time, and just drew me in like a magnet to understand it. And I am more surprised than anyone could possibly be that it could continue to hold my interest 25 years later, 26 years later, because who would think fat could be so interesting? But it is. It's complicated stuff. It's a very sophisticated organ. It has an incredible breadth of functionality and importance. And so I've been exploring that all this time, along with the rest of the body. I'm not just a fascia guy, of course. The whole thing intrigues me.
And you, I recall back to the second course that I attended of yours, the 3-week course. The first one in San Francisco was a 6-day, and then the second one in Jersey was a 3-week course. Mm-hmm. And we came back from lunch and we got all suited up and we just kind of like gathered the 8 forms and we kind of made a big circle around them and just started chatting about the superficial fascia. And we were all gloved up and ready to dissect. We were standing there for 2 hours just talking about superficial fascia, just that layer, and people's, connection to it. Some, it's stigmatized, and a lot of people have such a strong aversion to that layer mm-hmm. because of cultural
baggage.
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. And so I love that you say that it drew you in, and you're still you continue to be drawn in.
Yeah, and I was first drawn in by beauty, and then I was drawn in by horror, right? Because my lack of skill in dissecting it made a mess, and the mess was emotionally disturbing. Actually, it gave me nightmares, literally. And it took me years to get over kind of the PTSD that I generated from my own class. I was a little traumatized by dissecting that layer, and yet I was simultaneously compelled by it because I'm like, why am I traumatized by this? What is it about this layer that stimulates the emotions? What is it that that when you can't perceive its integrity, it challenges you, and when you do perceive its integrity, it suddenly becomes a whole much easier to relate to. So my favorite example are these horrible models of fat tissue that you'll see in a chiropractor's office or on the shelf of a massage school or a therapist's thing, and it's like this jiggly yellow thing with some red blotches on it. It looks like a broken yellow mountain or something, and it says, it'll be like, that's a pound of fat, right. And the idea is to inculcate horror, and I'm offended by that. Actually, I just see that as an example of very poor dissection that failed to respect the fabric, the integrity of the tissue. And if you do dissect it well, it's quite amazingly beautiful. It's the shape of the human form, which to me is extraordinary. And so I shame anyone who has such a model. I went to a chiropractor's office, had a 5-pound version of it, and I just laid into that guy.
It's not just a blob.
Not a blob.
It has structure now. So, and I show
a lot of structure. Yeah.
Of course. So in the course we've viewed your Berlin 2018 Fascia Congress video.
Great.
And so tell me a little bit about the motivation for that project. I was personally involved in that in a pretty big way, and but what I wasn't there for the part where you came up with the idea. I was there like massaging it for hours and desperately trying with all these different approaches to get those lipid cells removed in order to reveal what was beneath it, or rather what was holding it all together. So tell me about the progress, the journey to get to that point.
Well, I went from basically macerating it in my early dissections to coming to a point where I could, like you mentioned about the skin, I could dissect the entire superficial fascia off the body in one go. And the only reason I could do that was because of its integrity, right? So having demonstrated that integrity and the kind of autonomy of the tissues as an organ, I presented that at the first Fascia Congress back in Massachusetts, and whenever that was, a long time ago. And still, I felt like even having that beautiful fleece demonstrated, I don't think people still could understand it as a fascia. They're like, it's just fat still. And I'm like, well, it's both, you know. In other words, adipocytes are connective tissue cells, and this is a fabric, and that's why I can dissect it as a whole. And so I was like kind of frustrated that I'd created this image that people I hoped would be kind of converted to a state of appreciation for it. And I think I made some progress with that. But then when I still realized, well, people still can't understand it because it's yellow. And so I thought, Lori Nemitz, who I think you know Lori, wonderful professor at University in New York somewhere.
Yeah, I'll be working with her. I'll be working with her and Leslie coming up in a couple weeks.
Oh, right. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, say hi for me. Yeah.
Yes,
so Lori had done a wonderful project that she presented at one of the fascia congresses, where she created what she called a ghost heart and a ghost kidney, and basically following the same methods that they used in experiments to basically dissolve away all of the parenchyma, the cellular material of an organ, and just retain the connective tissue scaffolding so that they could, put stem cells on there and grow a person a new kidney, grow a person a new heart, who knows?
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So these experiments have been done and very fascinating. And she thought, well, that's awesome. I wanna see a ghost. She called it a ghost kidney or a ghost heart. And so she used common household chemicals, and she basically emulsified these organs and drew away the cellular material and succeeded in creating this ghost heart. And I looked at her presentation, thought it was fantastic, and thought, well, that's great, but I want to make a ghost superficial fascia.
Absolutely.
That was the inspiration. So I thought, okay, if Lori and these people can do this to an organ, I should be able to do it to the superficial fascia. And I proceeded to use those methods and fail completely.
Right. And so what do you think it was? Because it was, as I was in the corner, and you were still conducting a course, and you were, occupied with the students in the course, the somonauts. Yeah. And I was just in the corner, and I was thinking about like puncturing it. And I remembered that weird little device that I had from flower shows in elementary school. Right. And I was like, if I could find one of those, but like, what do you think it was? Why do you think it was different than what Lori had done with the heart or the kidney? Like, what about this fabric?
Because the lipid content, number one, the lipid content is much higher, and it's encapsulated. Yeah. And it's encapsulated all the way down to the microscopic level. There are no little sacs of olive oil in your body.
Yeah.
These tissues are, and I have looked under it under a microscope, and I've actually dissected it under a microscope now.
Wow.
And it's beautiful in there. Each little tiny lobule is a whole bunch of little miniature lobules. And within them is a matrix of connective tissue that gives structure so that you can slice right through it or puncture it all day long, and it will never drain of its lipids and render itself. And so, what our discovery was, there together with you squidging and me rooting for you, was that the most fragile parts of the superficial fascia could literally be pulled and pushed out of the structuring matrix. And having accomplished that, as you did, and Juno after you, it was like, whoa, there's this chainmail in there. There's this, very collagenous structure that's not linear. It appears chaotic, and yet its structure, it's a chaotic structure that gives tremendous integrity, so much so that, you can pierce it and hang from it. People do this, and
we watched you. We watched you in the video straddling the sink and lifting 40 pounds of weight, I think.
48 pounds.
48 pounds, yeah. And we in the course I talk about the epimesium wrapping of fascia, the deep fascia, and then how that scrolls down and divides the individual fascicles, but also how that scrolls down and rounds every little individual microscopic muscle fiber.
That's right.
So you're saying the same thing is there, that same structure, that same like rudimentary foundation is there in the superficial fascia or the subcutaneous fat layer as well.
Yeah, just a different pattern. Just it's organized differently, but it's the same stuff. So you can take yarn and knit it into a whole lot of different types of fabric, right?
Sure.
And we are similarly diversely knitted.
Yeah, I love that. I don't know if I've ever heard you say that before. Like it's all, because you talk about, how fascia, basically everything in the body could be, made up of this same material. But I love that the yarn that's just knitted in a different way.
Yeah.
And so, you knit yarn in this way and you get deep fascia. You knit yarn in that way and you get heart tissue. You knit it in that way and you get bone tissue.
That's right. That's exactly right. And what I've found is, that basically we have a bunch of different, it's like, we're like textiles, we have a bunch of different fabrics. And each one has its own properties, right? Some are stretchy pants and some are not stretchy pants.
Tell us about stretchy pants, Gil. Tell us about the outfit you wear to walk to the mailbox, to walk to the post office in the wintertime. Your stretchy pants and long sweater.
That's me.
Yeah, that's you. So anyway, so we are textiles essentially. We're composed of
textures.
Varying.
That's right,
Yeah.
a variety of textures, and the words are not unrelated. So we have these different whole body textures, and each one is like a different fabric, and having its own kind of integrity and contributing to the whole, the movement of the whole. That symphony of movement is both dependent upon fabrics that are more distensible and flexible, and also ones that are specifically not so, whose actually resistance to movement allows you to move.
You talked a little bit about your initial appreciation for the superficial fascia. Now and that was before my time. That was before I met you. But I was sort of, I witnessed as you sort of discovered new things about what you now refer to as the perifascia, and how you renamed it and how you essentially changed your entire story. In the fuzz speech, which we watch in the course, you were saying that you have to get rid of that fuzz. You have to,
I never said get rid of the fuzz.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I said melt
correct
it.
Me,
but,
correct me.
But what happened was I gave footage that appeared that I was getting rid of it, and that I regret to my grave, because like a million people plus now think that they should get rid of their fuzz, or they take that away. But that was I'm not quite. Yeah, that part I wouldn't be on board with.
I think, and do correct me again if I'm going down the wrong tunnel with this, but you were saying that over the course of nights, you can accumulate several days worth of the fuzz, and which I think you were implying would restrict movement, but then your story completely changed to no, it's not restricting movement, it's actually facilitating it.
It's actually both. What the thing is that it depends upon the condition of that tissue.
Right.
So if the condition of that tissue deteriorates, it becomes a limit cycle on movement. And if the tissue is in its best status, then it's facilitating movement up to a point. It facilitates movement, but it has an end range, just like our skin has an end range. And the end range of perifascia, then it becomes force conducting. So it has both properties actually. It can resist movement because it's in the end of its range and becomes force conducting. It can resist movement because it's inflamed, dehydrated, and agglomerated. In which case it can be a progressive pathology, or it can facilitate movement under its most slippery state when it's in its healthiest state. So I wasn't actually that far off in the fuzz speech, except in intimating through distracting visuals that the preferred presentation of the scapula, for instance, is the dissected presentation as opposed to the intact presentation. And that is kind of the visual takeaway given the words that I'm saying, but I just lacked the footage at the time to properly illustrate the properties of the tissue, nor did I understand them, 15 years ago the way I do now.
Yeah. And so speaking of the footage, like the increased quality of equipment you had and your increased skill in dissection, so I showed the video where you just take the scalpel and you just drag one of the more superficial, superficial.
That might be my favorite clip in all of my archives. Yeah. And you go to that stomach and you're looking right through it at the deep fascia, and then the scalpel goes zips, and you're like, whoa, there's something else there.
And but hang on, because when I've shown this video in my anatomy course in the past, and everyone in your little one-day national RV around the country tour is but when I show it, I don't think people get it quite yet because they haven't had all the preliminary stuff.
Yeah.
But to be able to marvel at watching what was presumably not there before, what so many people missed. You can see it as you reflect it, and it's got the tensile strength, and then you put it back down. It's like, wait, but where did it go? It disappeared. And that's my whole story from slide number 1 of my presentation is so much stuff can be missed or misinterpreted.
Exactly.
Or so tell me about that transition from the fuzz to filmy fascia to perifascia.
Yeah. So in those very first dissections I was doing, I'd be kind of pulling at stuff and seeing what looked like cotton candy to me. And I was like, wow, it's kind of fuzzy in there. What's that fuzz? Literally, what's the fuzz?
What's the fuzz? WTF?
What's the fuzz? Yeah, it was not in the books. There was no reference point for it. Now, ultimately, I did find that there was a reference point for it. It was called loose areolar connective tissue. But I didn't read that much yet. And in all my Rolfing training, I never heard any mention of it. In fact, what we talked about in our Rolfing training was differentiating tissues that were stuck together. And so when I saw that fuzzy stuff, I was like, maybe that's what I'm Rolfing out of somebody's body. Maybe my Ida Rolf said that muscles should slide on each other like silk stockings. I'd never seen any silk stockings that had fuzz in between them. And so I thought, and look at it, and I can just lift it up and brush my finger through it, and it disappeared. Like, where'd it go? It vanished. And so I thought that I was basically, parsing out the agglomerated hydrogen bonding and cross fiber linked tissues that Tom Myers had mentioned in our Rolfing training, not realizing that was a microscopic phenomenon initially. And that the tissue that I was touching actually belonged there, always belonged there, was always there. And what was happening was I was basically taking a membrane that had been dried by formaldehyde, and then when I pulled on it and put it in tension, the actual structure of the membrane was revealed to be a chaotic fiber organization that actually permits differential movement in every direction. But all that was over my head at the time. Instead, I just saw fuzz, saw that I could make it go away, and thought, how cool is that? Feels is fun to do. I'm Rolfing the body. I'm making it into a bunch of silk stockings. How wonderful.
Right.
But after my 100th dissection, I was like, oh, this stuff belongs there. It's not like everybody is like the Tin Man frozen in their bodies, So obviously this stuff belongs there. It's loose areolar connective tissue. And because it has a filmy quality, particularly when the tissues aren't so desiccated, and you can see, especially in unfixed bodies, how there's like this slippery film. And so I started calling it filmy fascia. And I was even calling it filmy fascia in the Integral Anatomy Series production, which was 100 cadavers into my dissection career. And so I called it filmy fascia. So I called it fuzz for about 10 years, and then I called it filmy fascia for about 13 years. And then for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been calling it perifascia, as you mentioned. But I didn't even go there immediately. I called it perifascial membranes. Because I was like, well, I don't think anyone will argue with me that it's membranous. and it's around the fascia, like it surrounds the fascia, so it's around fascia. So I called it perifascial membranes. But then I was like, I'm going full hog, because now that I can dissect it into sheets, right, on camera, over and over again, into multiple layers, over and over again, all over the body, over and over again. That means that it's fully qualified now to be called, a fascia proper. And that meant a lot to me, because, to take a tissue that's normally considered to be a loose aerially connected tissue and demonstrate that it actually can be rendered as a fascia makes it a fascia, because it's that simple, that just by definition. If you can turn it into a sheet and bounce stuff off of it and demonstrate its tensile strength, it's a fascia.
Sure. And you also talk about how, I think, aside from just realizing that the fuzz was actually this layer,
a fabric,
being stretched, being pulled taut.
Right.
But additionally, part of your discovery of this tissue was that you simply couldn't get a good, clear photograph of the deep fascia, right? And you thought it was the camera, you thought you weren't focusing it right, but you were scratching your head and stomping your feet because you couldn't get a great photo of that deeper layer.
That's very true. What was the moment? What was the moment of realization where you're like, oh, because there's something in the way? It took years for that moment of realization. Literally years. I spent $5,000 one week. On a body and a laboratory and a setup and going with cameras and blah blah blah. And the whole purpose of that week was that I was going to document the deep fascia. And I wanted to show the different sort of hatchwork patterns around the body, and to show their anatomical consistency, and just to reveal that. I thought that would be cool. And literally every picture that I took during that week was a total disappointment. They like you said, they were fuzzy, and they weren't sharp, they weren't crisp. My eyes could see crisp lines in the tissue.
Yeah.
And yet when I took the picture, all I got was glare, and I couldn't see. It looked like a foggy haze. And I was like, I'm the worst, photographer ever. I can't, I look at it with my eyes and I can't take a picture of it. What is the disconnect? And I just walked away from that. I think I got one picture of deep fascia out of 1,000 that I took that week.
That was a very expensive photo.
It was a very expensive photo, yeah. And people are like, "Can I use it?" I'm like, "No." I'm like, no, give me $5,000. I'll give you the picture. Or another $5 for the frustration. But it took a number of years, and I think actually. Like I said, I was already calling it filming fashion. I have footage from that very shoot where I was doing something very similar to what you see me do in that other video, where I'm with my knife and I'm going back and forth. And I was doing the exact same thing to that form, where I saw the film rather than the fuzz, the film between, say, rectus femoris and the vastus intermedius. And because they are in relationship through a membrane. And there I had the membrane on camera, and I was going zip, 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 and I was showing the vessels moving back and forth over each other and demonstrating the differential movement. And I was like, well, that's cool, but still I didn't have language for it, and I couldn't get a picture on the other side of it. So it wasn't until, it was 7 years later. Before I was, and you witnessed me. I can remember a class with Leslie Kavanaugh, and they had dissected the arm on this cadaver, and Amy Matthews was there too, right? Sweet people.
Yep.
And Rebecca Rothstein, they were all at the same table, and they had basically dissected the deep fascia. They skinned superficial fascia, perifascia, didn't know about it. And then deep fascia, and they had left like a square of deep fascia here, just this weird square floating across the arm, and that was the key. It was floating because there's perifascia beneath it as well, right? Mm-hmm. And so I put my fingers on it, and I went zip, 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 and I was like, I was like, oh my goodness, I literally, I think I spent the rest of the day at that table going, because suddenly I was seeing in reverse the differential movement potential, right? Because the deep fascia actually doesn't go anywhere.
Right.
The deep fascia is the stable element and everything else is moving underneath
Yep.
it. But in this case of this opposite day dissection, they cut this little square away and I could see that it was connected and yet it was moving. And that to me, that was my launch.
Right.
Now that you asked me the question, then I was like, whoa,
Cool. Cool.
Of course the muscle tissue has differential movement below the deep fascia. What about on top of it? And now at this point, you saw me go through the process of demonstrating sheets of perifascia, but I'll challenge that now as well, because our dissection always was producing artifacts, right? So in other words, my knife can only lie is the fact of the matter. And so when I looked at this stuff under the microscope this year, had a lot of fun with a very cool tool, kind of a handheld microscope that links up to the computer, and you can sort of have movies and photographs taken in real time. And what I now know to be true is that the reason why I can cut a sheet of perifascia off of the deep fascia on its external surface and then turn the deep fascia over and cut off another sheet of deep fascia underneath it is because really the deep fascia is embedded in a membrane. That there's membrane, it's not just above it and below it, it's through it.
Yeah.
It's through it. Every fiber has passing through it, this membrane, and so it's as if you took a handful of spaghetti and lined it up in a row or in a crisscross pattern and then put it into Jell-O. And if you took that out of the fridge, you could cut a sheet of Jell-O off of above the spaghetti, and you could cut a sheet of Jell-O off of below the spaghetti, but it doesn't change the fact that the spaghetti is embedded in the Jell-O. And similarly, the fibrous matrix of our body is embedded in a Jell-O. And that's very jiggly actually in life, and that's why we can be so jiggly. Because if it's not jiggly, you're suffering, from inhibition of your movement.
You're stuck. Yeah. And so to reiterate, just to get this across, I think this might kind of hammer it home for my people watching. When you notice that little square in the triceps area or wherever, if you had the ability to pull it directly perpendicular away from the arm, you would see fuzz. That's right. But what you were doing is you were yanking that fuzz to its end point, which was giving you that movement. So that really links, I think, the original fuzz speech to the now new perifascia speech. It's that if you were able to just yank it like that, you would see fuzz. You'd see all those little interconnected strings. Right. But it also acts as a movement facilitator. That's right. When you take it out of its anatomical position, it's weaker as well. Okay. Right. Just like if you're unstranding a rope, it's not as strong as the rope was. And similarly, if you kind of do just like you said, and you kind of unstrand the filaments, of collagen that form this particular weave, which is a different weave than the superficial fascia and a different weave than the deep fascia. Right? It's a more felted kind of weave but a slippery felt rather than a dry felt. So it has different movement properties. But if you look at something like Gimberto's videos, which are beautiful, and is that the exploration beneath the skin? Is that strolling under the skin, promenade sur la peau, right? Is his little French video that you can hear in English too. But basically, he's lifting up the skin of the hand. He's a hand surgeon, and you shove a camera in there, and you're basically looking at the disintegration actually of those membranes. And then it's I think the illusion that can be taken away from that is that that's how the tissue looks. It doesn't look like that actually. It's actually a membranous layer, which when pulled apart looks like cobwebs or cotton candy. Same thing, cool. Just different approach. Great, thank you for all of that. I've been promising your heart speech.
My heart speech. There's another 2 hours.
I know. Which one of the heart speeches?
Yeah,
what story
one?
do you want me to tell? But and I usually tell it. I usually kind of relay that from you, the source. But since you're here, I thought maybe you could give us a little sample. And the one I'm talking about is essentially like the Rudolf Steiner. The heart was in fetal development. It's a tube, and then it wraps around. And remember how Beltran took all that time in that one course, and she unwound it. And then we were all gawking and amazed at the work she had done, and then she just wound it back up, and then unwound it and wound it back up. I mean, we could have watched that for hours.
Yeah.
But mostly, what I would love for you to provide as a supplement to my course is how how basically it would be impossible for your heart to pump blood through 60,000 miles of vessel, some that are only one red blood cell in diameter. The amount, what I try to get across is that 60,000 miles of vessel. If you laid all of the vessels in the human body out in a line, it would be 60,000 miles, which would circle the globe twice. Mm-hmm. The size of a pump that you would need to get fluid around the earth twice in what, like 20 seconds or whatever? I mean, you would need a pump the size of a city. So talk to me about that.
So many years ago, I picked up an article by Rudolf Steiner titled "The Heart is Not a Pump."
Right.
And I literally gasped.
because we all know that the heart pumps the blood.
All you have to do is go to a doctor's office, and you can literally see a poster that says the heart is a pump, and then explains how it pumps. And so, how could this not be true? And so I never read the article.
Okay, you just read the headline. That was it.
The title, just the title sent me. It was like the Muktananda hit you with a peacock feather or something. I was like, dong, the heart is not a pump. And so I've literally spent the rest of my career thinking about what might it be if it's not a pump, and why isn't it a pump? And everyone knows it's a pump. But
if it's not a pump, then what is?
If it's not a pump, then what is? And blood is moving blood. Blood is alive, and it's alive on a spinning planet, and it can't help but move like all the other fluids on the planet, which are circulating around the planet without a pump. There's no pump. We don't bring in the pump. The Hudson River needs to get to the ocean and get us another pump. We need to send it up into the sky, or it rains on a mountain and it seeks down into aquifers and plains of water, and then it gets to a point and it goes back up. We don't need a pump. Nature is quite effective at moving fluids on its own, and and we have circulation on the planet, and we have circulation in our bodies because we are persons of the earth, and we can't help it. And just as you say, I mean, if you've ever seen a heart-lung machine, they got a big ass pump to take the heart's place when they put it offline and do open heart surgery and stuff. So if it can become a pump on a bad day, just the way slippery perifascia can become the resistor of movement rather than its facilitator.
Yeah.
The heart can become a pump in pathology. And that's when we get megalocardia. Right? We get people's hearts enlarging because there's a demand that's been placed upon them that's not natural to them, which is to push.
Right.
And so the thing is, as much as the heart is not a pump, that means that the blood vessels are also not pipes. And they're not subject to the same friction coefficients that a straight pipe is, that a pump is pumping fluid through, and you need a bigger pump to pump through a narrower pipe. And the narrower the pipe gets, the more friction there is and the more force you need. Now, given what you mentioned about our blood pathways and vascular networks, clearly the the pipe is getting smaller. So we theoretically have to push harder and harder, but actually that does not take into account the very interesting properties of fluid movement on our planet, which are the fluid moves vortically, for one thing, and it meanders, and it creates counter vortexes, and water beautifully can actually kind of crawl through a capillary without any help at all, because of the adhesive properties of fluid and blood fluid or water in its gel state, as opposed to its liquid, solid, or gaseous state. Gerald Pollack speaks beautifully about the gel state of water that occurs at surfaces in which it's interacting with other substances. And so really our blood is being sucked to the periphery through that capillary network, and then it's being sucked back into the chest space through pressure differentials. So we have a rather than a it's not being pushed around. And my favorite naturalist, Victor Schauberger, Austrian naturalist, who was an inventor and spent his whole life in the forest in Austria and made many observations of nature and was quite a brilliant genius inventor. One thing that he created were conical pipes with rifling inside of them. So, rifling, right? So interestingly, our aorta actually can be visually shown with cameras that rifling manifests during each pulsation of the aorta. Now, a rifle is an improvement on the musket, right? Where you just kind of explode a ball straight out of a straight pipe, and that's pushing, right? That's an explosive pump, and we have those in our car engines. But an explosive pump where you just push a ball out of a pipe, basically, and it goes kind of goes like a knuckleball straight out, and just like knuckleballs, it's nuts. It's like if you rifle the inside of the barrel, then the projectile is spun, and because it's spun like a vortex, right, like a little tornado coming out, it goes faster and longer and is more accurate. Similarly, our blood is being spun by our heart. And I would say that the heart is the place where the blood refreshes its movement. The blood refreshes its movement. The heart is not the actor upon the blood. The heart is an artifact of the blood's movement. The vasculature is an artifact of the blood's movement. The blood came first in the embryo, then the vessels. The blood was moving before the vessels. And so that's something to get your head around. But if you think about, it's easy if you think about our natural world and you see water flowing and it's spinning and it's meandering and it's creating counter vortexes as it winds its way across the land, which is not defining its movement, but rather the water is defining the pattern in the land. The water invokes its space in the land, not the other way around. Now we try and do that backwards, and we put up canals to define, limit, resist water's propensity to meander and create switchbacks and doublebacks and move like a rattlesnake across the sand. That's how water moves. And similarly, our blood is spinning and winding through our bodies, and yet we can resist that movement. Now in our environment, we do it with canals, right, and walls and dams, and we tell water where we want it to go, and then like a child resisting its car seat, right, like, don't imprison me like this. The water will wear out the dam. It'll go over the dam. Eventually it'll drop all of its sediment for its movement being resisted and its vortex being frustrated. It'll drop its sediment, and then eventually all that sediment will build up and the water will just go over the dam. Or you'll build a canal and the water will literally grind away the canal until it can get back to its meandering. So you have to repair it. You have to repair rock walls. You have to repair canals, because water will always defeat them. It's an inevitability. And similarly in our bodies, if we resist the flow of life that's happening within us, the movement of life happening within us. If we resist that through hypertension and emotive states that actually tense the blood vessels, which are muscular, in a way that canalizes the blood, makes a canal of the, and then we have both mechanical abrasion now of blood against the blood vessels, and we have also chemical abrasion, right? And so we have the wearing down of the canal walls in your body. And then it's like, we have homeostasis. It's like, I'm not going to let you get away with that. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to fix it by producing more cholesterol to address the oxidative states. It's a mild level antioxidant. We're going to pack the oxidized cholesterol into the fissures of the walls of the vessels, which will be proliferating smooth muscle tissues to restore their smooth and meandering surfaces. And if all of that fails and it's still breaking it down due to the chemical and mechanical abrasion of resistance to the movement of life within you through the tensing of the vessel walls, then the body will replace the vessel walls with eggshells. Basically it'll deposit, it'll build bone. It'll turn into bone, eggshells, and then bone even, and trabeculi even will form in there. Yeah. And at which point, you'll live longer because your vessels have actually become canals, but they added the resistance because this is required of the blood vessel to go with the flow, as it were. And if this is like this and no longer moving, now your heart's got to pump, right?
And it's almost like putting a rubber tube into liquid nitrogen and freezing it, and suddenly it's brittle and crunchy and doesn't have the ability to flex and bend. And I don't know if I've told you about this one, but I've pondered as we've found calcified vessels. Yeah. It's almost like it reminds me of those like little straw cookies, those little like chocolate filled straw cookies, and you just kind of like crush it, and it's like that's it. It's just crunched and it's gone suddenly,
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, it's the end game. I don't consider that disease. To me, that's all those conditions in the blood vessels are actually the homeostatic responses to the prior condition of hypertension and the chemistry that accompanies it, which can be degraded also dietarily or through emotional states, really. So we can actually heal that. It's just you have to do the opposite of resisting life. Suddenly the movements of the heart need to be followed rather than governed.
Or restrained. Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks. I've told you this before. I start each day of my course with a quote that I jotted down of yours, and this wasn't one that's been that you've published or anything. It was just in a course one time. I jotted it down. You said that folks seek an expert to absolve themselves of responsibility. And I use that as my disclaimer because I love to teach what I know and what I've discovered through your help about the human body, but I am by no means an expert. So that's my disclaimer. It's like I start every day with, I am not your expert. And you are not absolved of responsibility. It is I'm teaching 16 hours of anatomy. That's nothing. But I hope that I teach it in such a way that it's enticing and compelling as to use that as a springboard for other people to go off and study on their own, learn all the stuff that they want to learn.
It's 16 hours more than most people get.
Right. Well, and that's I'd like to, as we're wrapping up here, I'd like to just give Gil a huge shout out for all that he's done for me in the past 6 or 7 years. And guys, go check out gilhedley.com. We just finished in March, and what was the second one in June? These live stream.
We did
cadaver dissections.
We did one in August. Yeah, we did June and August, May and August. Cool. We did May and August live stream.
That's what it was. Yeah. So anyway, there are two massive. What it was, we recorded 1 hour a day for 6 days, I think. So there's 6 hours from
Sometimes
May,
an
6
hour
hours
and a
from
half
August.
I went on. Sometimes.
Oh, yeah, yes, of course. But there's tons of material there on Gil's website, and he's in the midst of this new project, as he always has a new thing simmering. He's been in Colorado for the past 7 months working on these 2 specific cadavers, and there's going to be a lot of content out there someday. So yeah, if you're looking for, using my anatomy course as a springboard, if you're looking for that next step, if you're into the stuff that Gil's talking about, and if you are not completely turned off by the videos that I've shown you over the course of these past couple of days, then go check out gilhedley.com, because there's a ton of stuff there, and he's a magnificent resource, and hopefully you all understand that now after speaking with him directly for a couple minutes.
Thank you. And
Cool.
you
So, Gil,
are a magnificent resource, both to me
Stop.
and your
I
and your
can't.
friends. No. He's got mad skills, folks. Trust me.
Mad skills. Well, hey, again, Gil, thank you tons. This means a lot to me. And it's just such a unique experience. Normally I just talk all about you in the anatomy course, but now the people attending the course get a little live sample. So thank you. Cool. All right. Thanks, Gil.